From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
It's pretty likely that the uncertainty surrounding the raising of the debt ceiling for both businesses and consumers has been unsettling and just one more impediment to the full recovery that we need. And it was something that we could have avoided entirely.
President Obama signs a deal to raise the debt ceiling, while the real unemployment rate in this country rises above 20%. In the black community, it's at depression levels. We'll speak with Congressmember Donna Edwards. One of her latest tweets, quote, "Nada from million billionaires, corp tax loopholes aplenty, only sacrifice from the poor middle class, shared sacrifice, balance, really? Then Syria."
Decry the violence, and the violence needs to stop as quickly as possible.
Syrian forces continue to kill civilians in an escalating crackdown on pro-democracy protests. At least 6 people died today, pushing the toll to at least 150 over the last 2 days. Then more than 100,000 people in Israel have joined nationwide protests against high costs of living and growing income inequality.
This protest is a reaction to the 20 to 30 years of misleading government policy, whereby a capitalist, destructive policy that harms its citizens has been in place, and we are here to change the character of the country.
We'll go to Tel Aviv for the latest on the more than 40 tent encampments that have scattered across Israel. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. President Obama signed into law the bipartisan measure to raise the federal debt ceiling in return for over $2.1 trillion in budget cuts. Obama held a signing ceremony shortly after the Senate gave its approval in a 74-26 vote, following House passage one day before. A new joint congressional committee will be mandated to oversee the cuts of the money in government spending in over 10 years, with automatic reductions in place should Congress reject the panel's proposals. In a speech, Obama called for a balanced approach in slashing the deficit.
This compromise requires that both parties work together on a larger plan to cut the deficit, which is important for the long-term health of our economy. And since you can't close the deficit with just spending cuts, we'll need a balanced approach where everything's on the table.
The deal includes no new tax revenue from wealthy Americans and no additional stimulus for the lagging economy. Speaking on the Senate floor, Majority Leader Harry Reid criticized Republicans for blocking a tax hike on the wealthy.
The vast majority of Democrats, independents, and Republicans think this arrangement that we've just done is unfair because the richest of the rich have contributed nothing to this. The burden of what has taken place is on the middle class and the poor. My friend talks about no new taxes. Mr. President, if their theory was right, these huge taxes that took place during the Bush 8 years, the economy should be thriving. These tax cuts have not helped the economy.
We'll have more on the debt deal after headlines. The United Nations is warning the food crisis in the drought-stricken Horn of Africa has grown to threaten over 12.4 million people. Aid groups continue to plead for donations as funding continues to lag. Less than half a $2.5 billion UN appeal has been met. On Tuesday, a UNICEF spokesperson urged international airlines to help carry aid to starving children.
The funding situation is dire for the Horn of Africa. UNICEF has a funding gap of over $200 million out of its $314 million appeal. There are over 2.3 million acutely malnourished children in the Horn of Africa. More than 500,000 will die if they do not get help within weeks. With therapeutic feeding, a child can fully recuperate in a matter of 4 to 6 weeks. We are asking the air transport industry for free or heavily discounted airline cargo space to transport this therapeutic food to children who will die without it.
The Obama administration, meanwhile, has announced it'll ease terror restrictions that have slowed aid in areas controlled by the militant group al-Shabaab. Aid groups have been forced to scale back operations in some of the most devastated areas out of concern they could face prosecution if goods are diverted to al-Shabaab hands. Former Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak has appeared in court for the first time to face allegations of corruption and the killing of protesters during the uprising that overthrew his rule. Mubarak arrived at the Cairo court on a hospital stretcher, which was brought into a caged area inside the courtroom. Appearing with his sons Gamal and Alaa, Mubarak denied all charges against him. The trial is being broadcast live on Egyptian television. Syrian forces continue attacks on the restive city of Hama amidst an escalating offensive against pro-democracy protests. An estimated 140 people have been killed in attacks by forces loyal to the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad since Saturday. The UN Security Council convened a lengthy session on the crisis in Syria Tuesday, but failed to reach an agreement. We'll have more on Syria later in the broadcast. Record high levels of radiation have been discovered at Japan's earthquake-stricken nuclear plant. The operator of the Fukushima Daiichi power plant says radiation levels reached at least 10 sieverts per hour between the plant's number 1 and number 2 reactors, up from a previous record of 3 to 4 sieverts per hour. 3 workers were reportedly exposed to dangerous levels while monitoring the radiation. The Iraqi government has authorized talks on keeping thousands of U.S. troops in Iraq beyond a withdrawal deadline at the end of the year. On Tuesday, the top U.S. military chief, Admiral Mike Mullen, said any agreement to extend the U.S. occupation will require the Iraqi government to grant U.S. soldiers full immunity.
That kind of an agreement which would include privileges and immunities for our American men and women in uniform will need to go through the Corps. I also understand that time is quickly running out for us to be able to consider any other course. My government has made it clear that we would entertain a request for some troops to stay.
Newly released documents show NATO forces have prioritized the avoidance of so-called friendly fire incidents in Afghanistan more than reducing killings of Afghan civilians. According to The Independent of London, a British military panel concluded, quote, avoidance of collateral damage or nutricide is a secondary consideration, with, quote, the primary focus improving operational effectiveness while reducing the risk of fratricide. In the latest known attack, 5 Afghan children were wounded last week in a bombing from a British attack helicopter. On Tuesday, top officials from the U.S., Afghanistan, and Pakistan met in the Pakistani capital of Islamabad for trilateral talks. Afghan Deputy Foreign Minister Jawad Lodin said his government continues to push for reconciliation with the Taliban.
We have a pretty good understanding of the Taliban leadership and who they are, and at various levels. Now, some of them we have identified, we have even contacts with, but really the majority of the ones that really need to be brought into the peace process are the ones that we need to establish contact with.
In Guatemala, 4 soldiers have been convicted for the 1982 massacre of over 200 villagers by a U.S.-backed death squad. The case marks the first time members of Guatemala's armed forces have been convicted for the Dos Eres massacre. The victims included women and children who were strangled, beaten with sledgehammers, and thrown down a well. The soldiers, members of a unit called the Cabiles, were sentenced to 30-year terms each for the 201 known victims, for a total of 6,060 years. After the sentencing, a relative of one of the victims celebrated the landmark verdict.
We all feel happy. Everyone from Dos Eres feels happy because we got what we wanted. So there would be justice for these people who did not have compassion for all those people, children, elderly, innocent people, hardworking, who they killed.
A former Guatemalan soldier deported from the United States last month is expected to stand trial for the massacre in the coming weeks. Thousands of people rallied in West Papua Tuesday to call for independence from Indonesia after more than 40 years. Rallies came amidst escalating violence that's seen 21 people killed over the past week. Another top executive at the Rupert Murdoch-owned News International has been arrested in connection with the phone hacking scandal at the now-shuttered News of the World. Former News of the World managing editor Stuart Kuttner is the 11th Murdoch staffer to be detained. Mark Lewis, an attorney for alleged phone hacking victims, said Kuttner could face questioning over payments to British police.
I'm sure the police will want to know what payments were made, but if there were cash payments, he would have had to have some explanation given to him as to what they related to. They might, of course, know nothing is proven against him, and there might be proper explanations for them, but I think those explanations will be requested. Questions will be asked of him.
Parts of the United States have endured a record-level drought, leading to widespread crop losses and water shortages. The ongoing dryness has covered the largest amount of U.S. territory since the National Drought Mitigation Center began keeping records 12 years ago. Nearly 18% of the United States is experiencing exceptional or extreme drought, and experts say the problem is likely to get worse. Southern states, including South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Louisiana, and Texas, have been hardest hit. A group of disabled veterans of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan have reached a settlement in a class-action lawsuit over the denial of medical care after being discharged for post-traumatic stress disorder. The U.S. government has agreed to grant the group of more than 1,000 former soldiers lifetime disability retirement benefits. And Congress has failed to resolve a budget impasse that's left thousands of Federal Aviation Administration employees out of work for nearly 2 weeks. The House and Senate began a 5-week recess on Tuesday without coming to an agreement on FAA funding. The stalemate centers around money for rural airports, but Republicans have also attempted to alter rules on labor elections in the airline industry. Tens of thousands of construction workers have been forced to halt work on airport construction projects, and dozens of airport inspectors are working without pay. Although the stalemate could extend through Labor Day, the federal government insists passenger safety is not at risk. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.